Hello, this is Mingder Chen. I'm Professor of Management Information System at Martin Smith School of Business and Economics at CSU Channel Island. In this module, we're going to talk about communication, in particular business communication within an organization and the importance of communication for business professional. At CI, actually, we have a required upper division course called Business 310. That's actually specifically designed to help students to learn the necessary communication skill. And also, we do have a communication program on campus which offered a variety of communication related courses. And let's look at communication in the context of this POLC framework. It's actually listed under the leading category, which really means that we rely on our ability to communicating with other people to provide leaderships. And although you may not be a leader, a lot of times, even as a follower, you do also need to communicate with your colleague and sometimes even with your boss. And so if we look at a variety of skill within leading, we can say communication is important for a leader to provide its leadership. Leader a lot of time are great communicators, and also communication play an important role in the decision-making process. And you do need to talk to a lot of stakeholders and get them involved in the decision-making process. And working in team also has actually a lot of closed interaction which rely on communication, and we also rely on communication to motivate people, to persuade people. It's part of the leaderships as well. And we're also going to focus particularly the process aspect of communication, and a little bit about the kind of resource that will be needed, and definitely the sender and receiver within a communication context. It is the people on both ends, as a sender and as a receiver. So here are just a list of kind of objective and outline for this module. And we want to define what communication is, and particularly laid out the standard communication process as a framework which guides us throughout this module. And we will also need to understand different type of communication scenario. And next is to identify barriers for effective communication and how we can remove those barriers and such that we can achieve effective communications. Number 4 is to give a few examples such that we can learn from great communicator, a master presenter such as Steve Jobs. And number 5, we're going to talk about the importance of visual communication, which become more and more important in this kind of a multimedia environment. And as a good communicator, you probably need to be also the good listener. So active listening skill as a communicator or on the receiving end of the communication process, active listening skill is very important. Number 7 is to talk a little bit about the physical space, the office design, the layout in the setting of where communication may occur. Last, not the least, is we touch base a little bit about nonverbal communication and body language. So let's get started. Definition. Communication is a process by which information or message is exchanged between, could be an individual, smaller group, organization unit, or actually with some unit outside your organization. And we use language, verbal or written, symbol, sign, or sometimes even our behavior send the message. Behavior is not just the body language. Behavior means what you do instead of what you say. A lot of send a much stronger language, a message. And the importance of communication just go without saying. Some studies show that managers spend more than half of their time in communicating, and you need good communication skill in order to motivate people to share the vision that the organization may have. And so let's study how we can be a good and effective communicator. Effective communication. I said it as a speaker. You got it. And I also want to make sure that you got what I said. Okay, I got that, you got it. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. But certainly this is a little bit of one-way communication. And two-way communication is the same thing. You said it and I got it. You get what that I got it. Okay. Aristotle has laid out a three-step for great speech. This is more or less for presentation and public speech, and it's pretty straightforward. And actually, I heard it from a PhD classmate of mine many years ago. And first is tell them what you would tell them. Okay, you want to have a presentation outline. You want to tell people what's the key point that you're going to discuss. And the second is just to tell them there's a different way you can deliver the message. You want to deliver it in the logical steps, and also other than logical sequencing what you want to discuss, you also want to make sure that what you're going to talk about would resonate with the heart of your audience. Okay, and you need to understand your audience and know what is important to them, why they're here, listen to you in the first place. Okay. And the last, to conclude your presentation, you want to tell them what you just told them, which means you want to iterate your salient point in your talk. Okay, what are the key message? You always need to kind of point out your key message, drill down during the middle of your speech the key message to go a little bit deeper, but at the end you want to summarize the key message again. So repetition, different kind of way of repeating the message is important to drill down and get your point across. This is a very common and important process model of communications. And basically we have sender, we have receiver, and then sender has a purpose, intention they want to achieve. So so they basically want to kind of send the message to the receiver. And so the starting point is really what's the purpose of this conversation, of this communication act. Okay, and you need to translate that in certain format, written, verbal, by different medium. Okay, as a message. and send it to the receiver in a setting, in an environment. Okay. In the environment, there will be some noises, so you have to kind of make sure you send out a clear message among thousands of other messages that the receiver may be receiving. The receivers basically will decode your message and translate your message to understand actually your purpose and intention, and we call it perceived purpose and intention. And hopefully these two are the same. Okay, sometimes the receiver may misunderstand the message that's been sent to them. Is this what you mean? This is what you want me to do? So that is important. Okay. There are different type of medium, and here I list some. Also listed here could be text, could be oral communication by voice, by phone, by audio or video conferencing, which is very common nowadays since the COVID pandemic. And a lot of time when we are communicating, we tend to rely on some multimedia to help us to convey our message. And also our body language or facial expression a lot of time also are very telling. And to complete the communication process, there's another aspect of it is actually getting feedback from the receiver to make sure that the receiver understand our message. And particularly it's an important one. You send a message and ask people to do certain things or request certain information. You want to make sure they understand it. And you send out a very important policy and you do try to explain it, but then you may want to ask people, what do you think about that? And what's the impact of this policy to us? What's your opinion? To make sure they got the message and they have thought through it. So the receiver now is actually the sender. They need to encode their feedback message and send it back to you. You need to decode that and then understand their feedback. Okay. And so this communication, technically speaking, is not just one way, it's always two-way. Sometimes it's more heavy on the sender side to send a lot of message, and the feedback can be short and brief, but sometimes they're equal partner in this communication process in terms of sharing information, engage in meaningful dialogue. But still they follow this process model of communications. And another thing which is at the bottom here is the context. What's the context? Okay, the context kind of related to the purpose and intention, the bigger context to help us to really understand what's the purpose and intention. So if we drill down a little bit, the receiver is a person who receives a message. I put receiver first because I think you need, as a sender, you want to understand your audience, okay? And in order to craft your message that will be appropriate to the receiver, okay? And the receiver certainly need to be a good listener, and they will decode your message, assign meaning to the words and the message they receive, and they need to provide feedback as needed. Okay, the sender, certainly you are initiating the conversation, they would encode the message and then translate that into proper medium to convey their intention. Okay, the medium we mentioned, there are a variety of medium nowadays we can use, and for instance, more and more we may be using Zoom for teaching, for meeting for actually a public event, and how you learn how to use those modern information technology tool is also important. And we live in a media-rich society, and so how to use proper medium is important. However, don't overkill, and sometimes people use a lot of clip art to enhance their PowerPoint slide. Some nice touch would be really, really good, but I'm more on the conservative side. Use it properly is the most important things. And in the past, the communication may use linear mediums, which means poster, message email. Here we call it bulk email to a large audience. And sometimes we got like campus-wide email sent by somebody from the campus, the president, the provost, and that's for everybody. They're not very targeted, and you don't send out that kind of message that often unless it's absolutely necessary. Email, memo, formal letter of recommendation, and things like that. That's also quite common. And then through audio communication, like by phone, and eventually video conferencing. Face-to-face is the most richest one because you can see the body language, the facial expression the best. And that certainly is quite common, but more and more we are relying on kind of a virtual environment in communicating with others. In terms of medium, you thinking about using image, pictures, diagram. Personally, I like diagram. I think diagram, like this is an example of diagram, do help you to describe a little bit more complex relationships in terms of what you want to discuss. And video can be also helpful if you can find the right one. Right now, there's a lot of YouTube video that you can, if you're willing to spend time, you can find some video clip that may enhance your presentation. Presentation slides is another thing. Infographics. So what is infographics? This just, you can follow the link and get the complete infographic, which is much larger. I only captured part of it. This may not be totally up to date, but here are some statistics about business communication. And employees are using several devices to communicate with their colleague, and some people use even more than 3 devices. Okay, and people do rely on computer in communicating with others. Email is a very common form of business communication, and how to write and craft proper email message is important. Although we seldom teach students how to write proper email. Okay, and and increasingly, as you can see here, only 1 in 20 would prefer face-to-face meeting over business communication tool. I have to say, in the early stage of interacting with someone, particularly someone you don't know, you probably want to have some FaceTime, okay, which means face-to-face meeting to kind of know the person. And once you work closely and become familiar with each other, then the kind of a virtual meeting through some modern communication tool would be a lot of time more effective because you don't have to make a trip to the meeting place, etc. Okay, and voicemail is not a good way to communicate because, like, if you call me and leave a message in my office, I may not be able to attend to it for a few days until I have a chance to go to the office in the current situations. Okay. So if you engage in any communication acts, as I call it, there's a major task. You need to make a presentation. You need to make a report to an audience, your boss or your colleague, of some research report that you're working on, or update them on your project status. You do need to plan those communications carefully. First, you need to ask, like, why you call the meeting. Okay, why you want to send this message, and who do you want to send it to, and what message you want to send out, and what do you want to say, and what do you want to say actually tied to why. Okay, what's the purpose of this communication act. Okay, who is know your audience. I mean, if I'm attending a meeting, whether as a presenter um, or even as a participant, I always want to know who else may be attending and what's their background, and are they required to come, or it's all volunteer, and what's their background if all possible, because that help you to determine how you want to communicate with them. And then it's like, how do you communicate with them, and when is another issue, like when you should send the message. Okay, for instance, send something out like Friday afternoon. People probably don't get it until next Monday. And so if something important, maybe it's better to send it out Monday morning. Okay, and certainly they will see it, but there will be a delay. They may not be able to get back to you. Um, Not just when, but also how often. Sometimes we have like schedule staff meeting every week or every month, and how often you want to schedule those meetings. And sometimes if there's nothing to talk about, why schedule something like once a week. Okay. And certainly if you work on a project and there's a project team, a lot of project team has actually a daily morning briefing. Talk to everybody in the team. What have you done yesterday? What you planning to do? What stopped you from doing what you're supposed to do yesterday? And they kind of quickly sort it out. And sometimes they even hold those meetings. Everybody will be standing and keep the meeting really short, like only 15 minutes. So everybody can go off after the meeting to do their job. And where you hold your meeting, choose the right meeting room, the location. It's only a few people. You don't need a large meeting room. Smaller, more cozy environment would be better. And it can be also virtual. Okay, seeking feedback actively. Okay, just make sure people really understand it. And particularly if you communicate with many people, it's very difficult to get a sense of whether they're getting it. Some people may get it, some people may not. Okay. Understand the purpose or the context. Is very important. On the right hand side, there's a diagram lists only a meeting purpose. You can read this article here to kind of study it a little bit further. I kind of captured that and kind of grouped differently. And basically, are you making a public speech, motivational speech, inspiring speech to inspire either the general public or your team member? This just information session, which means I'm going to tell you what, say, the president told us in the high-level meeting. You're going to tell the people who work for you, and sometimes the meeting is to give instruction. Okay, like for instance, like military operation. I mean, you're going to launch an attack, and you try to make sure everybody know that's a certain time you're going to launch it, and this is target and things like that, and this is whatever you need to carry with you. So you're giving a very specific instruction. Just like a lot of my assignment to student, I have to give very clear instruction. What's the tool to use? What's the deadline? When, how to submit it? What you have done, and in what format? What's the requirement? And you have to actually lay it out very clearly. A lot of time, my assignment description can be very, very long. Sometimes maybe too long. However, I want to make sure I give clear instructions, and hopefully student will read it in the first place. I consider that's part of the training. They need to be a good listener and be able to follow instruction. That's very important skill. On presenting, providing training, or teaching somebody something, that's kind of a different purpose. Selling skill. You are communicating, but you're in the selling mode. Selling your ideas, selling maybe your product to customer. Persuasion. Persuade could be internal, persuade other people about your idea, your proposal, or persuade the customer in buying your product. The communication can be just informal, casual, social occasions. And in those situations, a lot of time is to share emotion and our feeling. I remember our campus had caught a wildfire quite a few years ago, and the president afterward hold a meeting, which basically is to allow people who attended to share their emotion and feeling, comforting each others. Okay, coordination. Okay, particularly for project management, you want to coordinate who is doing what, and we all understand what each one of us are doing and who has what to do, and that coordination is important. And facilitating is really the job of a facilitator, which means you are communicating with a group of people, but you play the role of a facilitator. They are the participant. You're not really in charge, but you're in charge of the process of the meeting to generate idea, to help them to make decision. You are not the decision makers, but it's however, you facilitate the groups such that they can make decisions. Communication can take a form of negotiation and mediation, or even debating. Debating is certainly a special case, but it could be a case of negotiation. Negotiation can occur more formally, but we always are in some sense, when we communicating, we are negotiating a little bit give and take, and that may be occurring in a lot of situations. We do talk about decision making, which is partially problem solving, which required communication. Interviewing is a special occasion which also rely on communication. Interviewing in person, interviewing through video conferencing, it's pretty common nowadays. And how do you interview other people to make sure you can get a sense of what this interviewee is all about, and if you're the interviewee, and how you answer questions. And sometimes actually what question you ask is also as important as how you answer those questions asked by the interviewer. That's something a lot of people forgot, is as a person being interviewed, the interviewee, also are entitled to ask question. And a lot of time, what question you ask send messages. Okay. For instance, should you ask about, if it's job interview, should you ask about salary? Okay. It it's debatable. Okay. In I don't usually ask about salary because once you get the offer, that's when you negotiate the salary. Okay, and you can also figure out what the salary range may be through other sources. So I don't usually bring up the salary issue up as interviewee. However, if the interviewer, the employers, kind of ask you what's your expectation for salary, then you need to be prepared to answer that. There are different types of communications: verbal communication, nonverbal, written, which is a pretty common, and also increasingly visual communication are become a very important way how we communicate, particularly in written communication, in presentation, and etc. To be an effective communicator, we need to avoid a lot of barrier in communication and to avoid miscommunication, which can occur quite often. This, as you can see in this cartoon, and I told the doctor I broke my leg in 2 places, and the doctor told me to quit going to those places. So the miscommunication is actually occurred due to the interpretation of the words, in this case, places. Okay, and it's not the physical location, it's actually 2 places in this patient's leg. Okay, and so it is important that we try to avoid any miscommunication, and sometimes to try to say sometimes even one thing in several ways to make sure people understand it, and such that there's no misunderstanding. Here's just a list of some barrier to effective communication. And first of all, the listeners may filter out certain informations. They may selectively decide what they want to listen. And also, most of us are overloaded with information, so you may not get their attention in the first place. You don't have the empathy to emotionally connect it with them, and that could be a barrier. And also, as a communicator, certainly you don't have to be an expert in any all the field, but have some familiarity with the subject area that you're going to talk about is important. So you have a little bit of credibility, or let's show the sincerity that you're willing to learn about their issue, their business, etc. Okay, and there's a lot of gossip or grapevine within organizations. 70% of organization communication occur through workplace gossips. Okay, gossip can contain actually quite useful information when because a lot of time the formal communication channel may not tell all the story, and that's why people like to gossip. Okay. But you need to be a little bit careful in terms of gossiping. We'll talk about that a little bit. And try to avoid unnecessary jargons, abbreviation, acronym, buzzword. For instance, in my field, people love buzzwords like AI, deep learning, 5G, blockchain, you name it. Uh, People who use those jargon may not even understand its implication. Okay, and you do want to avoid that yourself. There are studies showing some gender difference in communications, and also different interpretation of the messages because of gender or educational differences. And try to avoid a biased language. Um, for instance, this is just a list of example. We certainly it's a common term we use like chairman, but we may use if it's a female as a chair, then we may say chairwoman or just chairperson. Okay, and personally, I don't like to use the term called secretary. You may call it associate, um, and to kind of show respect to people who may be helping you. Manpower. There's a famous book in my field. It's called The Mythical Man Month. I'm very hesitate to use that man month to represent how we measure the so-called manpower required for a project. So I sometimes change it to person month. Okay, and you may phrase it and say staffing requirement, etc. Okay, a lot of barriers are due to culture differences and language differences, and also some issue related to the physical environment. Like if it's a really large room, people at the back may not see your PowerPoint slide clearly, may not hear you properly unless you use the audio system with speakers. And so you need to pay a little bit attention to those physical environment. Effectiveness communication rely on, first of all, your message. Message is important, but also the so-called parallel language, which means your tone, your pace, and the volume of your speech, and also important. Okay, in terms of how you deliver it, it's not just what you said; it's how you say it. Okay, it's equally important. It's not how you say it; it's actually how you present yourself, which include the body language. That's also important. Okay, including the use of your gestures. Okay, and too many gestures may not be the most effective way to communicate, but proper use of gestures definitely will be important. Too many of them may be a distraction. Okay, this is just an example of somebody kind of showing, maybe talking about the size, the height of certain things, and that gestures certainly may help. And you can follow this link. Okay, this is actually from a so-called Toastmasters organization's document. Toastmasters, and if you can find a local Toastmaster program, it's a non-profit organization, and they do kind of provide training for people to be not just the Toastmaster, but to be a great speaker. In a TED Talk, Julian Treasures identifies 7 deadly sins of speaking. That the speaker is a sound expert, kind of. He trained people how to speak properly, and the the seven deadly sins are listed here. Gossip, judging. Judging means that prejudging people, prejudging the speaker, or even your audience. Negativity, always talking about negative things. Complaining, which is similar to negativity. Find excuse for yourself, or even lying. The last one is dogmatism. Dogmatism means that you kind of confuse the facts with opinion, which means that if something is your opinion, say that's your opinion. If something is a fact, and say that's the fact. Okay, and so people will feel that you're very objective in a way when you try to communicate your message. If you commit any of this seven deadly sin of speaking, then your receiver may not be listening to you. Gossip. We mentioned gossip a few times. There's a Chinese and Turkish proverb stated that who gossip to you will gossip of you. So you always need to be careful about people who come to you and gossip about something, particularly saying negative thing about some of your colleague behind their back. Okay, and because they are going to gossip about you behind your back and to others. Okay, and however, if there's somebody spreading the gossip about you, and if you want, you need to confront them directly, or think about why they're not willing to say something to me directly. In the same TED Talk, Julian Treasures also laid out 4 principles that can help people to kind of listen to you when you speak. The acronym is called HAIL. Okay, honesty, to be clear and straightforward. Authenticity, just be yourself. Okay, and certainly we later we'll learn some of the great speaker, but not many people can deliver a product launch like Steve Jobs. So, but try your best. You can learn from Steve Jobs, but at the same time, you need to be yourself. Okay, integrity. Okay, make sure you're honest about what you're saying. And love, which means that you do have that compassion and want to help your audience and whoever you're talking to. And by the way, in this video, that the speaker Julian Treasure taught the audience 6 vocal warm-up exercise that he said that he used before any speech. You can roll to about 7 minutes and a half to see how the warm-up exercise can be done. I'm going to try that next time when I teach in person. And verbal communication is important because a lot of time we do either video conferencing or in-face meeting, we rely on verbal communication. And storytelling is important in how we communicate. And so you want to learn from good storyteller or great storyteller how to tell a story, even in a business setting. Okay. A lot of times within the organization we have those war story cases that we handle, business case, and then we're sharing that. It's really part of the organizational memory, and it's a way for us to foster organizational cultures. So here there are a few link that about how to tell uh, a good story. And Pixar has actually has some publicly available information about rules of for storytelling, and you're encouraged to actually to study them. One of our program learning objective is communication, and communication include verbal and written communications, and they're both important and used in sometimes different setting and sometimes enhancing each other's. And so let's look at just a little bit comparison. This is pretty detailed, so I'm going to just highlight a few things. Um, if something is more formal, a lot of times we may want to use written communication because there's a record of it, like a formal memo. And for instance, we have for faculty member, we have a tenure promotion process, etc. And for the committee to determine the tenure promotion cases for our colleague, we would write a formal memo or letter to their personnel file. We call it working personnel action file. And that's written communication. And then afterward, the candidate who received that formal letter can communicate with us a lot of time informally, seeking feedback if they want. Okay, oral communication, you get a little bit more immediate feedback because the audience is in front of you. So when you, in particular in face-to-face, I'm talking about in face-to-face setting, and so you get the feedback right away, and you can adjust how you deliver your message because you can tell whether they're getting it or not, whether they're exciting about it, whether they really understand your message. For written communication, there's a delay in terms of getting the feedback, and not, a lot of time you don't get feedback at all. They receive it, you assume they understand it, but you never know. Okay, in business setting, you're not going to give them a test to see whether they really read it or understand it. Okay, and in the oral communication, face to face, you are you will accept receive nonverbal cues, nonverbal feedback, and that's important. Okay, and in terms of probability for misunderstanding, I think either oral or written communication, there's always a chance for miscommunication. The oral communication, a lot of time we may have misspoke and then may not, maybe rushing through certain things. So there's a little bit higher chance for misunderstanding or miscommunication. And let me just point out a very common tool that we use almost on daily basis, and it's a form of written communication, which is email. We do use email in communicating with our colleague. We receive email from our boss, and you can study this a little bit more. I just want to point out a few things based on my kind of experience. And first of all the email has subject line. Make sure you have a short and sweet and concise subject line indicating the essence of this email message. And include people who should be included in the in the carbon copy field, and And certainly if the message is specifically for several people, they are in the to field. Okay, to whom. And CC is, for instance, if I'm sending something to my colleague and then I want my program chair to also be aware of it, and I will CC my program chair instead of put my program chair into the to field in the email system. Blind carbon copy is you are sending a carbon copy to somebody, but the other receiver would not know that you have done so. Okay, and I usually use this in a little bit subtle way. I don't use it that much. Sometimes because a lot of time if you, for instance, if I send something to my colleague, I CC my program chair. It's almost like, hey, you're put on notice because the program chair is aware of this. You better do it. Okay, that's kind of a little bit the message like that. And so in that case, you may not want to do it. However, sometimes to protect yourself, which means make sure that your chair know that you did it, you have done it, and you do want to inform them, but you don't want to get your colleague upset, then BCC may be used. Okay, I say maybe. You need to be very careful. I have to say I seldom use BCC. Keep your email short and sweet. Okay, people are getting. I mean, depends on your the level, the type of work. People may be getting lots of message a day, so shorter message is better. Keep it short and sweet. Okay, and use punctuation mark properly. I add this to here because I have once received a message from a student a few years ago. There's it's relative. It's not a very long email, but it's not a short one, by the way. And there's no punctuation mark at all. I was shocked. Okay, I can kind of read it, but it's really weird. Okay, so use punctuation marks sometimes to kind of break a long sentence into a shorter sub sentences as well. Okay, don't use all capital letter. That's considered shouting in email, and also email kind of allow you to keep a record of the conversation. This is something I want to specifically point out to some of you, because a lot of time I would engage in some email dialogue with students. They ask for something, I return it, answer their question, and say, for instance, set up an advising appointment, and I say, this time okay? They will send a message back and say, that's okay, but they did not include the original message, my reply to their message. So when they say okay, sometimes even after a few days, I say, okay of what? What is the student talking about? I have to go back and search the old email, and sometimes in my sandbox, to find out what is the student referring to. So that's why it is typically I would hit the reply. When I reply any email, I will usually use reply instead of start a new email. So you have that kind of email chain. I mean, I'm using email chain here as a positive things, which keep a record of your conversation. You know how this started, how it progressed, and how it came to this stage. Okay, and be a little bit careful. If the email has a lot of receiver, then when you reply, does it really need to reply to all of them, particularly when there's a lot of people on that email list? That's where you need to be a little bit cautious in terms of either reply or reply all. Okay, and I remember many years ago, I was working with somebody from Microsoft, and it dawned on me that after communicating with her a few times and found out that she always used reply. And that's not my habit, okay, until after that. Then I realized why she keep replying and attaching our old email in this email chain. And then it's dawning on me that there is a purpose. I thought, then I think that's probably the standard practice at Microsoft. Okay. And sometimes in my email, the email message depends on the system you use. You can sometimes you can change the font size, font type, like boldface, italicized, or bigger font. And a lot of time, particularly longer email message, I would highlight the key point, okay, because people are so busy. A lot of time they don't read your email that carefully. So I want to make sure those key point has been getting the attention they deserve. The Canvas system we use, when I send email there, I cannot use boldface or use bigger font. Outlook, I can do it. Okay. Okay, so this kind of number 3, number 5 kind of are related. Okay. Here I include a list of 12 tips for writing effective email. Okay. That's it. This is the first half of this unit. We will come back and learn more about communication in organizations. Thank you. Bye-bye.